Hi everyone, I'm Dr. Rachael Durkin and I'm a senior lecturer in music at Northumbria University in Newcastle upon Tyne, which is in England. I'm going to talk today about a rather curious character in music history called Charles Claggett, who I'm sure many of you working on topics based in the 18th century or to do with brass instrument history have come across. So let's start off with a very brief summary of who Charles Claggett was. So his life has been somewhat mysterious, and this has not been helped by his frequent relocation throughout Britain and Ireland throughout his career and the inconsistent spellings of his last name. Further still, perpetuated facts that he hailed from Waterford in Ireland has resulted in the wide-held belief that Claggett was an Irishman who sought his fortune in London like so many other makers and musicians of the 18th century. I'm going to avoid giving you a detailed genealogical history of the Claggett family, as that in itself would occupy my entire paper. So instead, here are some basic facts about Charles. So Charles is an Englishman from Yarmouth in Norfolk, which at the time was one of the biggest towns in Britain. His father was a dancer and a dancing master who briefly worked at Sadler's Wells Theatre in London. Charles was baptised on the 8th of March 1733 and was likely born not too long before this. His brother Walter was baptised about 3 years later on the 28th of March 1736. These dates are a little earlier than those given in other sources, which have likely been taken from concert adverts of their performances as boys, where their age was given as a little bit younger than they actually were to make them appear more talented. This is at a time when it was very common to parade child musical stars to make a bit of money. For example, this advert here on this slide features the Claggett boys and gives their age as 10 and 8, when Charles was in fact 11 and a half. Note the lovely comment about the boys, who were mostly known for their heads of hair. Charles was therefore born into a musical family and environment, initially training as a dancing master alongside his musical studies, although it would be the latter he would become most known for, falling back on dance teaching in times of hardship, of which he appeared to have many. His brother, by contrast, had a more stable career by securing long-term performance positions in various cities across Britain and Ireland, and publishing music in line with the fashions of the time, particularly for traditional tunes from Scotland and Ireland. And Charles very much starts off in the same vein as Walter, securing performing positions as well as teaching and publishing some music throughout his career. But very quickly, Charles's professional focus takes a different path, and it seems that a fortuitous meeting with James Watt, a young maker of musical instruments who would go on to become one of the most important engineers in history, would set Charles on a path of organological innovation. Now, at this point, I had hoped to present a series of letters from an archive, but COVID restrictions are such that I've yet to travel to Birmingham, but I'll hopefully do this soon and I'll update you at a later point. However, based on other work on James Watt and music, most notably Michael Wright's paper in the Galpin Society Journal in 2002 and Nina Baker's most recent chapter on an organ supposedly by James Watt held in Glasgow in Scotland, we can gain an insight into some of Claggett's activities during the 1760s and the 1770s. James Watt was not a trained maker of musical instruments, and it appears that he migrated to instrument making via the manufacturing of metal components such as tuning gears and keys. In 1760, we have records of him seeking to sell flutes, and by the following year, he was employing someone to assist in the making and repairing of instruments. He continued to make and sell mathematical instruments alongside the musical side of his business. We do not know exactly when or under what circumstances Charles Claggett met James Watt, but from letters in the Watt archive, we can see that Charles was buying instruments from James Watt by 1761. In 1765, we learn that Charles's business relationship with William Gibson in Dublin has failed, and Charles then invited James to go into business together, which James turned down. We do not yet find Charles actively inventing musical instruments or their components, but his clear dealings in the trade and friendship with Watt points to an environment suitable for the exploration of ideas by creating and experimenting with prototypes. In the workshop of James Watt, now preserved almost in its entirety in the Science Museum down in London, Michael Wright has identified violin fingerboards built to meet Charles's 1776 patent specification, whereby the fingerboard had raised sections to help with the placement of fingers, but which could be lowered to make the fingerboard flat like a normal fingerboard. There is no mention in the patent of Watt's involvement, and it should be highlighted that these fingerboards are roughly made and evidently not designed for sale, not least because the scaling is completely random. And this leads nicely into a discussion of Charles's own inventions. Without further reference to predate this, it appears that the fingerboards were his first serious invention. Not only did he seek to improve tuning on violins, he also sought to improve the performance on English guitars and other fretted strings through the addition of a stepped fingerboard. In his doctoral thesis, Panagiotis Polypoulos identified one of Claggett's surviving guitars with his patent stepped fingerboard still in situ. And back in 2013, when I was working with Panagiotis on a journal article for Early Music Journal, we located a bowed psaltery, which is also known as a sultana or a cithar viol, which had changeable fingerboards, one stepped and one fretted like a violin's. Fortunately for us, the instrument was purchased by Gerald Trimble, who confirms it is in playing order, albeit a little bit delicate. The instrument is by Thomas Perry, it's dated 1791, and Thomas Perry was a maker who was based in Dublin, very close to William Gibson, who Claggett had a previous business relationship with. The 1776 patent also details a few further items. Firstly, bars, B-A-R-R-S, for larger bowed strings to serve as a caputasto, which when unused would sit to the right-hand side of the instrument's neck. Secondly, a transposer or a type of caputasto for guitar, which would allow the third to be altered for major and minor keys. And finally, some sort of tuning gizmo constructed of tuned brass or steel bars, which when placed near a string would vibrate in sympathy when the string was raised to the correct pitch. And that this would be detected by the user by placing a piece of paper on the bar, which would then fly off when it resonated. Every aspect of this patent concerns tuning, and this strongly indicates Charles's mission, as evidenced in his later inventions, to improve the overall intonation of instruments, both in terms of their stability and use by the performer. His portrait is underwritten Charles Claggett, Harmonizer of musical instruments, and he is pictured holding a large tuning fork and another presumably metal bar, whose purpose will become clear in a few moments. And it is this patent which causes so many to think he was born in Waterford, with his wording, I, Charles Claggett, of the city of Waterford, in the Kingdom of Ireland, but now residing in the city of London. Charles's second patent of 1788 sought to cover a wide range of inventions through his 10 improvements. Some of these improvements are not the best ideas, such as making the keys of a keyboard all the same length and at the same level so as to allow a single fingering pattern across the instrument, so that the shake is always even and much easier, shake being a trill. Or the changing of key tops to glassy enamel instead of wood or ivory, or a contraption to alter the angle of the violin's tailpiece so that the sound post could be repositioned more easily. Indeed, in 1810, E. Lydiate commented that the misfortune of Claggett's life was to have ideas theoretically sublime but deficient in practical utility. Other parts of the patent describe a set of tuning forks with additional weights, which can be married up to produce the exact pitch required, and a tuning hammer of different proportions. We are very fortunate that one set survives, having been recently purchased by the University of Edinburgh, and we can see the forks and weights and the tuning hammer with patent clearly stamped on it. I really hope to travel up to Edinburgh very soon to examine this set during the summer. Many thanks to Jenny Next for kindly sharing this information and photograph with me. The more significant items on the patent are for 3 instruments: the teleocordion, the iutum, and the chromatic trumpet or horn. I am not aware of any surviving examples of these instruments, but as with the tuning forks and hammer, it would not surprise me if full or partial examples of these inventions surface at some point in the near future. The royal teleocordion stop was denoted as royal as it had been added to a harpsichord owned by the royal family, an opportunity which proved to be very handy for marketing purposes. The teleocordion stop was facilitated by the addition of movable bridges activated by 2 pedals, which raised and lowered the pitch, allowing the octave to be divided into as many as 39 notes instead of the accepted 13. Please note here that Claggett counted the octave as 13 notes because he was doubling the tonic, it seems that the purpose of this stop was to more accurately accompany the voice, bridging the tuning gap between fixed tunings, such as on keyboard and woodwind, and unfixed tunings, such as the voice of the violin. The Auten, found in a variety of very awkward spellings, and it is also referred to as a metallic or ever-tuned organ, so it gets very confusing trying to find the evidence about this instrument. This item was a keyboard instrument constructed from a series of tuning forks and bars instead of strings and pipes. The idea was to create an instrument which required no tuning and that would not be impacted by the climate, both in the UK and abroad. Finally, the chromatic trumpet or French horn created an instrument that was able to play, albeit with a little bit of difficulty, a full chromatic scale. Claggett's rather cumbersome invention saw two trumpets or horns pitched a semitone apart, joined together at the mouthpiece and controlled by a valve which switched the airflow between the two instruments. In his description of the instrument, he wrote, "It is true, the immortal Handel has said, the trumpet shall sound, but he himself could never make it sound tolerably in tune, even in one key. But the patentee will venture to say, the trumpet shall sound, and with this valuable addition, it shall sound in tune." So why did Charles seek to improve tuning at this time? This is the question right at the centre of my inquiries into Claggett's professional life. And while today I do not have a complete answer, I can offer this. Returning to Charles's friend James Watt, it was documented by a Dr. John Robison, who was a contemporary of Watt, that Watt had studied Robert Smith's Harmonics, or a Philosophy of Musical Sounds. This was a book originally published in 1749, which was later revised in 1759, being a year before we assume Watt and Claggett met. This book is, for the everyday man, quite complicated and required a rudimentary understanding of logarithms and knowledge of listening for beats when tuning instruments such as the organ. I propose here that Charles, with James Watt's assistance, realised that this book did not meet the needs of the average musician, and ever the innovator, he set about resolving some of the issues highlighted in Smith's book through the creation of musical instruments and aids for tuning. For example, Smith details his invention of harpsichord stops to allow the playing of accurate enharmonics, such as D sharp and A sharp, one designed to be retrofitted and the other to be installed during an instrument's build. Ideally, Smith's design would create an octave of 24 notes, where every key had an accurate enharmonic available. Charles's teleaccordion stop appears to be an enhanced version of this for piano as well as harpsichord, capable of dividing the octave into the aforementioned 39 notes instead of the standard 13 chromatic pitches in Charles' world, where the tonic is always doubled. So we end up with 3 pitches per note as opposed to Smith's 2. Smith's explanation of accurately tuning an instrument by means of listening for beats and comparing one note against the other is again not particularly user-friendly. Claggett's adaptable tuning forks allowed the user to hear the exact pitch they were seeking to tune and would provide an accurate point of reference more suitable for someone who was not a skilled tuner. And the Auten, constructed from sets of tuning forks that was advertised as being always in good tune and suitable for warm and humid climates. Smith discusses how temperature can alter the pitch of an organ and recommends the best conditions in which to tune the instrument to avoid fluctuations between the pipes. Specifically, Smith mentions how an organ on a cold day in November was a quarter mean tone lower than it had been in September, and that it had been a half mean tone higher in the preceding August. And indeed, in Claggett's promotional pamphlet of 1793, he directly quotes Smith and chastises him for being too much attached to the organ. The Auten was therefore positioned as a replacement for the organ, cutting down on maintenance and improving intonation. It seems that accurate tuning was an acknowledged problem of the 18th century, limited by organological developments, and Charles wanted to be at the forefront of advancing musical instrument design, especially if it raised his profile and lined his pockets. While Charles's first patent addressed issues probably identified through Charles's own teaching practice, it seems that the second patent had bigger ambitions to improve intonation across music more broadly. And this, and his ambitions and perhaps his ego, led to the establishment of his musical museum in his house on Greek Street in Soho, London, where his inventions were displayed for all to see. And I should say that I do not use the term ego here in an entirely disparaging sense, because Charles did supposedly impress some of the bigger names in music and wider culture at the time. Charles promoted the letter received from Joseph Haydn, which said he had called at your house during your absence and examined your improvements of the pianoforte and harpsichord, and I found you had made them perfect instruments. He also received praise from Charles Burney for his trumpets and French horns. Again, Charles quoting from letters that their imperfections are completely removed by Mr. Claggett's expedient, and that Burney had heartily recommended them to Lord Macartney and his musicians. I must add that it is not entirely clear how genuine both of these letters are, or how much involvement Claggett had in their production. Claggett also crossed paths with the poet Samuel Taylor Coleridge, where it was reported that Coleridge had been spotted strolling and linking arms with Claggett's daughter. Coleridge, and presumably Charles, rather than his brother Walter, collaborated musically, with Coleridge recording that Claggett had set 4 of Coleridge's songs to music and that they were going to work on an opera together. Coleridge called for Claggett's metallic organ, or auton, in his play Remorse of 1813, being significantly after Claggett's death. Unfortunately, Claggett did not end his life with the fame and fortune he so clearly desired. In the April of 1793, Claggett was declared bankrupt. This is the same year he published his musical phenomena pamphlet to promote his inventions and his museum. Claggett receded somewhat from public life at this point, appearing in the occasional concert, some notably outside London in places such as Reading and Windsor. He died late in 1796, lodging in rooms at the Pantheon Theatre in London, quite the fall from his residence and museum in nearby Greek Street. And so I end this paper by appealing to you to let me know if you come across anything in your collection which may be identified as one of Claggett's inventions. Like the tuning forks and step fingerboards, it is entirely possible that one of Claggett's teleaccordion stops, iotons, or chromatic trumpets are hiding in plain sight. Thank you.